Now, yeah. So everybody, we're gonna have a really fun time tonight. I'm gonna explain the wines pretty early on for the purpose of those who don't want to open up both wines. If you want to open up both, I'm gonna also guide you through pairings and how we kind of explore that concept at the store. It's up to you. Um, but I promise we'll touch wine. And if you are going to drink both, I really do suggest opening up the red so it can breathe a little. So yeah, my name is Zach Berg, as Benji mentioned. I am one of the co-owners of Monger's Provisions, which I'm actually standing at in Midtown right now. And we are so excited to be doing this one. This is one of the tastings we've done in these Zoom tastings as we've been doing lately. And this is the one I've been looking forward to the most. So special shout out to Samantha Landy, who came up with this idea, a noted journalist in the food world in Chicago, who we really love. We're focusing on really cool small creameries and talking about their stories. But before I get too carried away while we're doing shout outs, shout out to a happy anniversary for the Serafinskis. We're very excited for them to join us on their anniversary today. And we're going to have a good time. So Benji is the man behind all of us right now. He's going to be taking any questions. He's monitoring the chat as well with Will, the other co-owner. So if you guys have questions, throw them out to the chat. Raise your hand, get your attention. There's an icon to raise your hand, and we can get your questions. This is always more fun when it's more interactive. So let us know what you're thinking. And on that note, please make sure to eat. Don't wait on me always for the cheeses. You know, we're going to walk through each one of these one by one. We're going to talk about all the wines, but I can get long-winded. Anybody on this who's seen one of these before will tell you I really like to talk about the cheese. So please don't wait on me. Eat the cheese. Enjoy yourselves. We're going to taste everything. We'll talk about, we use a certain language to kind of evaluate pairings at Mongers, and I'll walk you through that. So yeah, the wine, I want to touch that because I know a lot of people are trying to figure out which one they're going to open. So Lockhart Chardonnay is this amazing Chardonnay, and I feel like it plays the best of both worlds. It is a New World wine, but it drinks much more like an Old World Chardonnay. It's not quite that big oak bomb with the malolactic fermentation that you find in California Chardonnays, but it still has a lot of that softness. There's a little ML in there, but no oak. So they do it in a much more French style of Chardonnay coming from California. It's going to go great with absolutely everything. It's a stunning wine. And then we have a Malbec from France, beautiful wine, darker wine than I think what a lot of us are used to. Much more of that purple fruit. We'll touch on that, I promise, and like darker notes. And it's going to go well with everything but the goat. It's going to fight with the goat. Just to warn you, reds and goats don't get along. It's a clash that's been going on for centuries. If you try a bottle conditioned red, like an old red, sometimes they soften in a way that goes well with the goat. But, you know, not all of us have 15-year-old Bordeaux at home. So cool. Back onto the track. Wines aside for a second. What are we doing tonight? We're going to talk about these small farms who've had the hardest time in all of this, or, you know, who've really been affected and been doing interesting things reacting in COVID. There's a movement right now that's just been recently started called the Victory Cheese. And it's a play off the Victory Gardens after the World Wars and these idea of like having some sense of sustainability, self-sustainability through the community. And so this almost qualifies as one of these things, and we're going to kind of tip our hats to this organization. But we've been doing this for a while where we send these boxes and we get to talk about the producers. That's always what we like doing. And to be a Victory box, it needs to be all American cheeses. And that's what we have tonight. We have some really small farms. We have Indiana, we have Vermont, Michigan, and another Indiana. So definitely a fun tour through some of these small family farms. For those of you who maybe have not been with us before, briefly, you know, Mongers started with tastings. We started with wanting to do interaction. And so it's felt very natural, as much as anything can feel natural nowadays, to do these Zoom tastings with you all. We've been so overwhelmed by the amount of interest and how many people have been to 1, 2, 3 tastings. It's been awesome. I know Adam Walt is one on here right now who's been to several tastings. I know there's several more. And anybody who has, you know, make sure you throw it up in the chat. We appreciate those of you who have been to 3, 4 tastings. It's just so overwhelming and sweet. We like to connect you to food. You know, we live in this cross section between food and storytelling. Will and I started the company 3-4 years ago. We've known each other as well as Benji since we were kids. We've all grown up together since we were about 10, 15, depending on which one of us you're talking about. And we have always enjoyed food and travel and thought of the world through that scope. And we just want to tell stories and connect you to far off land and producers who work so hard. So to make your food. So let's just jump in and talk about Judith Shad and Piper's Pyramid. This is a really cool cheese. We bring it in from time to time. Judith is one of these amazing figures in the American cheese landscape. Boom. Benji's right. Cut it on this side so you guys can see that beautiful, boom, gooiness. This is one of the nicest rightness levels I've seen in this cheese that we've ever gotten. So you'll see this is kind of like a Valenciennes style cheese. It's a little goat pyramid, and then it has a little paprika worked into the rind and a line in between. So enjoy it. So this cheese is a goat milk cheese coming from Judith Shad, and I mentioned she's one of these people who really started this American cheese revolution. There's a TEDx where I go into more about that if you ever want to watch it. But it's an idea that we always had cheese in this country since colonialism, but we kind of lost our way with industrialization, right? We made good cheese. At some point, America made more cheddar than the UK, and it was well regarded. And then we lost our way. We all think of American cheese, comes very quickly to mind. It wasn't the first culprit. There's a really weird cheese called pineapple cheese. There's filled cheeses. If you ever want to read more about it, there's a great book called Cheddar by Gordon Edgar. Really fun read. And so when you look at like the late 60s to mid 80s, you have a landscape where people aren't making these homestead, these farmstead, small operation creamery cheeses. You have a handful of families who've been doing it for generations, but they're not really getting a lot of notoriety for it. And in walks Judith Shad, Allison Hooper, Laura Chanel, probably the most famous based on what we see in the grocery stores. Jenny from Redwood Hill Farmstead, Jenny Bryce. These women who from the late 60s to 83, 84 start opening up these creameries and introducing goat cheese. And like what you really begin is a movement into the interest of cheese, right? By the mid 80s, you have things like the American Cheese Society forming, places like Zingerman's, which we all love, opening up. And you have like a vibrant cheese world again. And so she's done amazing things since the beginning of her career. You know, her and her husband bought this small farm, and someone gifted her a goat. And all of a sudden they had more milk than they needed. And why don't we try making cheese? And then like this legend is born. And so Judith Shad's amazing. And the story goes that how they're surviving right now or how they're figuring their things. So they've grown so big, over 500 goats in their herd, that they've sold the herd off to a young family farm. It's Tim and Carmen Clark of Tuck Hill Farm, and they purchased the creamery back in 2012. And so, you know, Judith Shad has, I think it's really interesting, this idea that like, they're not just a small business, they support many small businesses, like the producer of their milk. Yes, it was once their herd, but now it's a family that survives on that income. So the story has it right now that Judith is committed to spending the same amount of money on milk, regardless of how much cheese they make. And it's a really amazing story, this idea that she's going to make sure that they continue for generations, because she's been doing it for, you know, at this point, 40 years. And we're so thankful for her leadership in this industry and kind of that security she's able to give that young farming family. So, and on top of that, it's just a delicious cheese. What do you all think? At this point, I hope you've tasted it. Let me know if you guys think of any questions about it, or throw up in the chat if you have any tasting notes. I think this is, you know, I mentioned it's not going to go with the red, but I think it's going to go brilliantly with this Chardonnay. You know, the Chardonnay has just enough acid to kind of clean up some of that creaminess. Just a delicious cheese. And I like the paprika. Sometimes you get just a little hint of that spiciness, but usually it's mostly just for show.
We're getting some good conversation. People liking the Chardonnay a lot. Someone says Vibrant Cheese World sounds like a fish cover band. Figure you'd appreciate that.
Thank you for calling that out, Benji.
So Lou wants to know what would this cheese pair with food wise?
You know, I think this cheese, to me, it's going to go really well with like green vegetables. Um, I always think of these kind of bright, fluffier cheeses as being really nice, obviously, with salads. If you wanted to give it a little more kind of respect and not chop it up and throw it into a salad, I think putting it along of a more vegetable focused meal as a centerpiece cheese is really nice. I also think with this beautiful creamy breakdown, Benji, if you don't mind switching to the cheese cam, I just want to call attention. You see how ripe it is? It's actually like doing this little cream right here. It's it's so nice to see this cheese that ripe. And I think when it gets that, you get more flavor of like nuttiness. And so I think that like Marcona almonds, a little chorizo, you start kind of playing off those more Spanish flavors. I think this cheese is really becoming something that it deserves the center of your plate. And we have a handful of these. This is a cheese that kind of takes a lot of work to get to us. They're a small creamery and they don't really have like the extensive network that some creameries do, which has been a real hard ship right now. You go from selling to your local restaurants and your farmers market to like, oh, I need grocery stores helps. That's not easy, right? Especially with cheeses that are so alive and like in different places in their ripeness. So this is a cheese we don't even get that often. Full disclosure, when we came up with the idea for this, the next day I called and placed an order for that cheese because it was the only way it was going to come in time, and it still was 2 days delayed. So thank God it showed up.
A lot of great feedback. You know, one Amy says the cheese is better than sex. And Anne-Marie Sumner enhances the Chardonnay. Chardonnay is awesome. Marielle asks the question, what fruit would you pair with it? Apricot, berries?
You nailed it. So I think the apricot's a great one. Berries, it depends on people's threshold for acid and what berry we're talking about, right? Like the ripest, most perfect blueberries are going to be awesome with this. But I think if you put like an unripened strawberry, you might get too much acid. I like the idea of dried fruit because I think the cheese is so bright already. That's definitely my thought, as I would be uh, low acid. So dried fruit or like nice grapes. Yeah, those are my thoughts on that one. What other questions before we jump to the next cheese? And I'm going to touch on the Chardonnay and the pairing idea. I'm glad that people already are mentioning this interaction piece. I want to introduce the next cheese, and then we're going to talk about wine for a second. So Harbison. Harbison is this amazing cow's milk cheese coming from Vermont. And in some ways, I almost feel like it's a cheese that's like beyond introduction, and Jasper Hills is also, but I'm not going to be that guy. So Vermont, Harbison has this bark rind, so we don't want to eat that wood piece, but all the white's going to be all right. And how I like to cut this is slowly into that bark, right? You can do that on your table. You don't have to do that into your hand. And in fact, we do not endorse cutting into your hand. I feel like I needed to say that for liability purposes. And then you kind of take it off the bark, okay? And then you have this perfect cheese. And now everything here is edible. This cheese and Jasper Hills is an amazing example of American cheese. So these guys have been making cheese for quite a bit, about 20 plus years. And they're two brothers. They grew up in Vermont. And I always like to call them the Keller brothers agrarian radicalists. They're trying to preserve the Vermont landscape one dairy at a time. And so they've tried to make dairy farming a viable reality still in their community. It's always had a lot of dairies, but as many of you might know, dairies have closed and consolidated over the years pretty quickly. So they've created an infrastructure where they can help small creameries in a significant way. So first piece of this was they started by just making their own cheese. They had their own herd, Ayrshire cows originally, and then they started by making this really elaborate cheese cave. So they blasted with dynamite into a hillside on their creamery and built a 5-compartment cave. It's a really cool idea. They did it in conjunction with Cabot Creamery. And the idea behind it was that each section of the cave, of the 5 sections, would be a different humidity and temperature control and would allow different molds to grow. So you have the bloomy rinds for the Harbisons and the Moses Sleepers, little Hosmers. Then you have the cheddar. Cheddar gets 2 or 3 rooms. So 7 caves, 5 environments. So cheddar gets 3 of these things. And then you have the blue room. Bailey Hazen was the first cheese that really took off for them, and that cheese always gets their own room, and they just started a new one we have in the case. I haven't tried it yet. We're going to be trying that soon, the Bridgman. And then they have the wash rind room for things like Winnemere and Willoughby's, and then they have the experimental rooms. And so all of these are super well controlled. These guys are super nerdy. They have a team of tasters and evaluators every day taste the cheese and map it on a visual grid of how these things develop and flavor develops. They've done DNA sequencing on their cheese. They've isolated specific cultures within their environment so you can sell it to another cheesemaker and say, oh, do you want the Bailey mold? We have that for sale. You can add that to your milk. And so they've really built this like more robust creamery, more robust part of the industry than just a cheese shop, right? And then it even extends further. With this cave system, they're able to buy cheeses from really small creameries like the Von Trapp family, like the Landaff family, and age them on their facility, brand them with their branding, and ship them all over the country with their distribution. So the Von Trapps, like from The Sound of Music, sell their cheese through Jasper Hill Cellars. So does Landaff. Cabot Clothbound does it in a much different way. They don't really need them in the same way. Cabot's the big boy in that relationship. Yeah, that's Harbison. I know I promised to talk about wine, but do we have any quick burning questions about Harbison before we talk about how we pair and all that idea?
We do have a couple. Ross wants to know if you could show the cut of the cheese again. I'll go to the cheese cam so you can.
Thank you. All right, ready? So I foolishly set the cheese cam up to be right-handed, which I'm not. So I can do this though. Cheese is the only thing I do ambidextrously. So I'm cutting down into that rind, right? And then I'm going to kind of pop my knife out. So I take it right off the rind. If there's any wood still, which often there is, you can just trim that piece right off. If you're not too worried about it, you can eat the wood. And shout out to Will, who loves this cheese so much that he once collected all the wood rinds and fried them in oil, I believe, right, to extract. It was bacon fat, I'm pretty sure. He's on this, so he can just tell you all. But he extracted the flavor of the wood and then cooked steelhead, I want to say, in this delicious, fragrant oil. So you can really get every single drop of flavor off this cheese if you choose to. And if you have a full one, the nice thing to do is you keep a full circle, you just cut the top off and let your guests dig right into the cheese. Especially when they're super ripe, you have your own bowl of cheese. So Harbison's is like one of the most fun cheeses. It won the Best in Show last year or the year before. I don't really remember at this moment, for the American Cheese Society Best Cheese of the Year. So Harbison. Yeah.
A couple other quick questions coming your
Thank
way.
you.
What breed of cows do you know? A common one when you mention.
I know a lot. This is a fun game. Ready? Ayrshire, Tarentaise, Jersey, Charolais, Holstein, Guernseys, Brown Swiss, Limousin, Angus. I'm forgetting a bunch, but that's a nice little rambling off. I'm pretty proud of that.
Yeah, we have a couple questions about the bark. One says this one. Amanda says this one has a cleaner taste. Why the bark? And then it was also asked by Kristen: is bark rind cheese common, or did Jasper Hill come up with this?
So it is. It's not them originally. Common isn't too much to say, but it exists. So Vacheron Mondor is probably the very first. There's a handful of French and Swiss cheeses that do this, and the idea is if you really let it go to that like funky extreme, which these cheeses are preset to do by having that bark, because it's going to hold the structural integrity. So when it gets so soft that this cheese would just fall apart, it's still going to hold up. It also just kind of gives you that perfume. You know, I think it even says on the sheet, I always say it's like drinking a glass of milk inside of a forest. You get so much creaminess and it is so clean, but you also get like the woods. I just love this cheese.
Yep.
Yeah.
Amy says this cheese was like meeting a handsome man in a smoking suit in a dark jazz bar and sitting down for a scotch with Mr. Wonderful. So we want to make sure that everyone sees these beautiful descriptions of what these cheeses are.
Amy, you are welcome to write copy. We have a lot of things on our website missing descriptions right now, so we'll feed you if you write descriptions like that all day long. So DM me after. We're going to work something out there.
And wants to know if we could take a field trip to the cave, and then after that, you may continue.
So they do allow visitors on certain days. It's one of those places that's so far out there that if you are willing to drive, they're not going to deny you your tour. It's in Greensboro, Vermont. It's about 15 minutes from the Canadian border. Remember that their Canadian border is more north than our Canadian border. It gets real cold up there. They have a mud season that I was unfamiliar with in the calendar year that is a real thing in northern Vermont. So don't go during mud season. All right, so I wanted to jump on the wine concept, right? I've talked about pairings, and this is one of the cheeses that we finally get to drink both wines. And so when we talk about pairings at Monger's Provisions, we talk about a -2 to +3 scale. People often find that to be intimidating, but I promise you it makes sense. So -2, you have brushed your teeth, you go downstairs, you have that big glass of orange juice, and all of a sudden you're like, cool minty blast is destroyed, and it's not by like tropical freshness, it's by just awful, right? Everything clashes. This is a -2. A -1 is, I find this happens when you're grazing at a buffet table. You drink a little red wine, I take something, I eat it, I go back to my red wine, and all of a sudden it's like super metallic. It has this really astringent flavor. I've had a chemical reaction with that wine and whatever I ate, and it's no go, right? That's a -1, right? The thing I ate was fine, but the wine just got ruined. A 0, I think, is what we find most often in life. So often we're just sitting on the couch eating and drinking. You're not really being mindful of the pairing experience. You're just kind of shoveling food. I think that's a 0, right? One moment, I'm going to taste this one. And so what I just tasted is like a really good example of this idea of when you go from 0 towards the positives. A +1, I like to think of like when you're cooking red sauce and you add red wine, the sauce is made better. The red wine really, it just got lost quite literally into the sauce. And a +2 is, I think this is a good example. If you found, this cheese maybe to have a little too much salt, or you don't like the taste of the rind, I think the little bit of like softness of the wine covers that up. But I also think that the milkiness of the cheese brings out the fruit of the wine, right? So both things are kind of elevated and rounded out. +2, that's like a very perfect textbook +2 to me. And then a +3 is peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, right? The sum are better than the parts. I've taken two things, they're so good together. This is how I should eat these things from now on. I'm not insinuating that this is a +3 by now tasting this together, but that is a +3, and now I'm going to try these and I want to see what they taste like. So I'd love to hear what you guys think. This cheese, I think is really nice both ways. I haven't talked a lot about the tasting notes of the red. Malbec is a wine that's made famous arguably by Argentinian Malbecs. I think that's what we all associate. It's a wine that's from France originally. I'm sure the French would be very quick to tell you. Cahors is actually a really famous region towards the south of France, if my geography is correct right now. And it is going to have a lot of body, a lot of, a good tannin structure. There's some grip on your tongue. But what's really unique about this is it's definitely dark fruit, right? When we talk about flavor wheels, which is why my hand went to a region, because I see the world in a flavor wheel. We often talk like, it's this idea of drilling down with flavors, right? So you might taste this and you're like, I taste fruit. And then I would push you further to say, what fruit are you tasting? Am I tasting a dried fruit, or am I tasting fresh fruit? Is it tropical fruits? Is it melons? Is it berries? Is it, and I think a lot of us would probably land on berries with this. And then the question is, are they dried berries? Are they red berries? Are they darker flesh berries like, blueberry, blackberry, mulberry? And I think this is a dark fruit wine. It has that really like deep note, which I think really plays with the woodsiness of that cheese. It accentuates that. So if you like some of the woodsiness of that cheese, you're going to like that pairing more. What are we all thinking, guys?
People like it. Kristen wanted to confirm what cheese you just ate when you tasted with the red. That was Harbison.
I did the Harbison. Yeah, I tried Harbison with both. Goat, like I mentioned earlier, tends to fight red. So I didn't actually try that. I feel like I don't need to, at least not while you're watching. So it's not like you're going to vomit. Please try it if you are curious. But like, I don't enjoy that. So if your cheese gets at all a little greasy or a little dry, just give it a little scrape like that. I'm doing that because it looked a little funky with this next one. This is going to be the Poet's Tome. This is a cool cheese, sorry. Um, and this is coming from Michigan, from our home state. You know, this cheese really kind of continues that thought that I was telling you earlier about creameries being part of a larger set of small businesses. So Kathy makes this cheese over on the west side of our state in Fenville. So right across by Saugatuck. She's kind of squirreled away in this beautiful vacation landscape. And she's been making cheese for quite a while. She's a very small operation. It's her and I think 2-3 other employees. I was trying to read a lot about her, and she's clearly not like a ham fruit press. There's not a lot out there. And I loved that when she had her About You page, she doesn't use her name ever on the About You page. And she always talks about us. And I just thought it was really cool that like, she's not like, I started this creamery. I did this. I did this. You know, she's the one emailing me. She's the one making the cheese. It's definitely her thing, but she has this beautiful vision of us behind there. And the people that are working with her. And so she also includes in that the creameries, right? Oh, I forgot to tell you about Harbison and what's going on in Jasper in this current event. So I'm going to back up for a second because their story is really good. Sorry about that, everybody, and tell you about that. And then we'll go back to Kathy and her stories, okay? So I mentioned earlier that Harbison has this crazy network of other people's cheeses. They have their own cheeses. They've actually acquired some herds. They do a lot of stuff in this like beautiful web of Vermont cheese. And in this current time of COVID, Mateo, along with some of the people from Pastoral in Chicago, are the ones who started Victory Cheese. And so that's one of the big things he's doing right now. He's trying to give a voice to all the problems that people are having in the dairy world. So right now, he talked about his numbers being down 40% from where they're supposed to be. Blue cheese sales are down by 70%, and that all happened overnight. France is down in cheese at about 60% across the country. It's a really crazy situation. You know, as we all know, cheese is not as sturdy as wine. We can't just kind of put barrels of it away and not worry about it. If anybody wants to look into how that's been going, there's some great stories about American government cheese rotting underneath the caves of Wisconsin right now. So I don't think they're going to add to those stockpiles. So cheese is really hurting. And Mateo had to do one of the hardest things I think a farmer could possibly do. And in these tough times, he actually dispersed his herd. So his 50 cows that they started their whole operation with are all now living on other farms. And this way he could continue to buy milk from his partner creameries and not supply his own. You know, as long as those people are feeding his cows and they're alive, he's happy, even though he's not profiting off of these cows. And then he's able to put his dollars into these other creameries. And it really just kind of gave him a little room for cash flow to get through an uncertain summer. And I think anybody who's been around animals, whether it's your pet or if you had any farm experience, knows the idea of losing your herd is like a last ditch effort. And that's what they did. They did it early because they wanted to make sure they had the flexibility to take care of their staff. And so Jasper's is really continues to inspire us and be an amazing, amazing example of creamery in America. Yeah, cool. Sorry about that. Any questions about Jasper before now I really go over to Kathy?
I think people are
cool.
into the tome now, so yeah.
Okay, thank you guys. All right, so Kathy, Poet's Tome, we're talking about Evergreen Lanes in Fenville. And I was talking about Kathy being part of this small business network. So she buys goat milk from a creamery that's down the street, and then she buys cow's milk from another creamery. The cow's milk she's been buying, it's been over a decade that she's been buying this same cow's milk. So those are her two biggest partners. In the case of this cheese, you also have New Holland Brewery. Maybe not quite a small business, but certainly a Michigan made product. And she's washing this cheese in the oatmeal stout. So this is her hard cheese. Kathy talked about, you know, the struggles that she's having. They've really translated directly into what she chooses to make. So I talked about cheeses not stockpiling perfectly, right? A cheese like Judith's is really volatile. It's going to have 4 to 8 weeks where it's really perfect. And then, you know, it's going to go downhill. So it's a cheese that only has a tight window. So Kathy is not making a lot of her softer cheeses. We've always enjoyed April showers from her. I think we've had it 2-3 times, depending on seasonality. It's a beautiful way to start spring is to use her April showers. She's not making that cheese right now because she doesn't really want to put a cheese that only has a 4-week shelf life into the world. She's just making a lot of Poet's Tome right now. And so we're trying to eat a lot of Poet's Tome right now for Kathy's sake. In terms of how her other small business partners are doing, the cow's milk is lucky because they're a raw cow's milk producer. They're able to do it. They're able to sell cow shares. And so they're doing really well in all of these milk shortages, selling direct to consumer. And the goat's milk is really hurting. So we're really hoping Kathy can start making some of those fresher cheeses, including the goat cheeses, and that we can do our part to kind of eat our way through this problem.
Great.
So I hope you all are trying this. Yeah, Benji, we have some questions.
Yeah, with some questions, some feedback. Everyone really seems to like the cheese. Brittany says the Tome eats very young. Amanda visited there when she was in Saugatuck this summer. Her kids got kicked out for being overserved, too many cheese samples. Amanda
My
also
niece
likes
has
the
that
smell
problem.
on the red as insane. Amy's description, it's buttery and caramel-like and luscious, but a little chalky and kind of awkward, like losing your virginity. So a rare experience for some. And then Ross with a couple real questions for you. Does Mongers intentionally try to support small business? And when doing cheese tasting, should you always go from a soft cheese to a hard cheese?
Those are two really great questions. I would say Mongers definitely tries to support small businesses. I often joke that the cheese taste feels like I'm just selling my friends' cheeses. I've been lucky enough to be in this industry for like 12 years. So we support some larger operations for everything from price point to availability reasons. But we definitely try to make conscious decisions on who we spend our money with. We buy from places that I have a feedback loop. That's really important. So if I can't find something, if I have a question about something, I want to be able to call someone who's going to answer that question. So we really try to work with people that we know. I've met Judith Shebs a couple times before. I've been to this farm and spent a lot of time with those guys. I've swam in the lake that their house is on. We've talked a lot on the phone, Kathy and I. These people came to Mongers recently and like talked to us. Those things mean a lot when we have a personal connection. With all seriousness, I think the cheese tastes better, right? Good people make good food taste better. So yeah, we try. We don't always only do that, but we certainly try to and talk about that when we do. In terms of the order of a cheese tasting, I don't think you should only taste firm or soft to firm. I think it's about the volume the cheese has, like the flavor volume. And I know that's not a real concept, but this idea that like, if I had a super stinky soft cheese, it would be the last cheese we tasted because it's really powerful. It has it's a high volume cheese. And so it's less about the texture, it is the impact, right? You want to go from the mildest cheese all the way up, I think. I think you could have made a strong argument for doing this one right there, honestly, especially after eating them all. I agree with, I forget who mentioned it, that it's eating very young right now. We've had Poet's Tome in a lot of places, and right now it's a pretty young wheel. I like them. They have a fun, like, what Sandwich Monster wishes it could be kind of vibe to me. I agree that it has a little chalky texture right now. I think that's probably a seasonal fluctuation in the milk that she hasn't figured out by this moment. And I also love how the beer, to me, gives you just a touch of bitterness in the back of this cheese. I've always really enjoyed Poet's Tome. I'm a sucker for it.
Sandy
Yeah.
wants to know, what is a tome?
Great question. Tome is one of the worst words in the cheese world in the sense that it means almost nothing and can be applied anywhere you want it to be. I would argue, for the beer friends on this, it's almost like the Saison of beers, where you feel like people just use it like, I don't know what this is, so it's this. Or Farmhouse sometimes gets that same play. So tome comes from this Roman word, I believe tomette, which is like a round, a partial. So anytime you have a round wheel and you don't know what to name it, you name it tome. So there's some famous tomes like Tome Creus or Tome de Savoie, and they have no relation from one to another except for those are two French cow's milk cheeses. But they're like very different. In America, they're used even more liberally, I would say. Many people just call themselves this tome or that tome. We carry at any time 3 or 4 tomes, and they're never related. And then Toma is a really fun cheese. It's not a tome, but sounds like it and just adds to the confusion. What other questions, friends?
Mary L wanted to know if we want to buy these cheeses, can we order them from your website or the Creameries sites? I put the link in the chat for people who do want to order them from us.
Thank you. Yeah, you can order from us. Absolutely. All of these cheeses are available right now. A handful of these creameries have built out their own sites. If you want to give directly, we totally support you giving to those wonderful outfits directly. We love them, and we hope that they can move through this. So, like, Jasper's always had their own website, and you can buy their stuff. I believe Capriel just finished one. She certainly does not. Kathy Small, she's old school. So, yeah, I think this is a cool example of how the pairing kind of game works. I think that it's important when we talk about those evaluations, to remember that, like, there's 2 approaches, right? I can do something where it's complementary, or I can do contrasting flavors. When you're doing complementary flavors, if you think of that first, that wine being kind of buttery, having a buttery cheese is a really nice complementary flavor. Conversely, if you think about it being really fatty, a fatty cheese, you could use the wine's acid to cut through it, and that's contrasting more. So for me, I think that, this cheese with the white wine is more contrasting. It's the acid and the fat playing off. But I think the red wine, all of a sudden I get the bitter notes from the rind. I get some of the more savory elements of the cheese being more complementary. And it's really choose your own adventure. What do you prefer? I think preference plays the biggest role, almost more than the pairing. Do you prefer red or do you prefer white?
Speaking of preferences, what kind of crackers would be best for these types of cheeses? Christina asks.
So we have a lot of flavors going on, especially with the wines. So if I was to really tell you, this is the one cracker to have out, I would say go as plain as possible so we can really taste everything properly. So I would do water crackers. I see someone say Rustic Bakery, amazing flavor, awesome crackers. They use a sourdough starter, so they're really great with cheeses, but it's going to kind of add to our palate fatigue. If that's what you have at home, good on you. Eat them. You're going to have a great night. If you're a snooty professional like I am and trying to have this pure experience, cars, those little 360 thin ones are, barely a cracker, but that's not a bad vehicle in this moment. Yeah. Anything else, Benji, before we keep moving?
Nope. Just one question, or one from someone asking if this recording will be available. Just a reminder, we are recording, and this will be on YouTube later tonight. So
yeah,
you'll have the opportunity to rewatch Zach all night long.
All night long. You also have our past tastings. At this point, we've done I don't know, Benji, you might know better than I, 5, 6 tastings at this point that were the public ones, the larger ones.
Yep.
And I think most of those are available online. One, I think the recording didn't work perfectly, but there's now, I'm proud to say, 8 hours of content of me tasting cheese online. So you can watch that, as well as the TEDx I talked about, the American cheese revolution that we got to do early on in our career. And we're continuing to do more video content and having fun with it. Thank you very much for that comment. We're very happy to be supporting. All right, so you guys ready for some Everton? Yeah, I saw a thumbs up. Let's do this. Everton's a cool cheese. I really love Jacobs and Bridgeford. I love all their cheeses. They do raw milk cheeses. They do them very well. I think that they have a serious amount of character to their cheese. To the people who asked earlier about cow breeds, this is a Tarentaise Jersey Holstein farm. So they have 3 different breeds. I imagine at this point there's some crossbreeding going on, unless they're depends on their farming practices. Some people choose to always buy outside of the herd to increase genetic diversity. It depends on their choices. But Jacobs and Bridgeford's a totally family operation, right? It's Leslie Jacobs and Matthew Bridgeford. And I always enjoy how non-conventional of a farm they are in several ways. So first, we probably are not even aware of some of the gender norms when it comes to cheese world, but they exist, right? We say words like herdsman or dairymaids without really thinking of what that might mean or the connotation or why we even have that default, right? And for a very, very long time in history, women made cheese in a family farm setting. And industrialization pushed women right out of the cheese making room. It was a man's job for a long time until Judith and these wonderful people came on and brought women back into the workforce. And now it's this back to this reversal where like most of the artisan cheeses, people often think of women being the cheesemakers, and then some of the like cheddars and more industrial cheeses are often men. The whole role is kind of changed. On this family farm, Matthew's the cheesemaker. His daughter is in charge of the farm operations and the herd management. And then the wife is the salesperson. She's the one least connected to the home. And she's the one who I meet at conferences, who came and visited us and let us taste through her cheeses. They make, like I said, really flavorful cheeses. A Marabella is my favorite sneaky cheese made in America probably right now. Everton, these are the two that I can remember right now. But I think this is a great example of a taste of place, which is the motto of Jasper Hills. But this idea of terroir being in cheese, right? You can taste that it's their milk in every one of their cheeses, even if they go on one tangent versus another. You can taste that it's their farm, their family, their community. They make really special stuff. And the Everton is their mountain cheese. And so a mountain cheese is this idea of like, you know, obviously cheeses from high elevations, but it's more than that. You can see, Benji, if you don't mind going to the cheese cam, you can see the texture of this cheese is really like solid, right? There's no tiny little holes. If we go back to Poet's Tome, my camera is not very good on the laptop, so you might not see it at home, but you see it on your own cheese. There's tiny little holes, there's gaps, right? The reason why Everton is so solid is because I've literally cooked and pressed the cheese. I've heated all the curds, and using weights or a pneumatic press, I've squashed any space in between those curds, any space between it. And so what happens is it melts really smooth. It ages really well, and it makes great fondues. It makes great raclettes. These are all those mountain cheeses. You know, being in Indiana, this is certainly not at the same elevation as a Alpine Swiss, but it's a really amazing example of an American-made cheese. I haven't even tried it yet. I've been talking about it so much. So let's try. And I think it's going to go really well with both wines, actually. Does anybody have any questions about this one? I'm going to talk about their story in a minute.
We do have some questions here. Start up at the top. First, John wants to know how much are personal one-on-one in his living room tastings. So
I think right now we're at $300 a person for a single one-on-one. You know, in your living room, it might go up to like 4 or 5. I don't know. Especially John. It's the John I think it is.
We have a couple questions about Everton in general. So someone asked, do you ever think about having a tasting of cheeses that are also football clubs? That one probably goes over your head, but like Everton, and then they mentioned Leicester, like Red Leicester. So you have a couple of those. And then someone also asks, is Everton related to the city in England at all?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I'll be perfectly honest. I do not know where they chose to name this cheese from. I would totally do a sports and cheese related tasting, but Benji or you would have to provide all sports knowledge. As Benji knows, I don't follow sports. Boxing, that's it, which, you know, speaks to my love of the esoteric or random.
We got a great question from Deb. And this is a common question we've gotten a lot recently, but Deb wants to know if there are African-American cheesemakers, and if so, where? I know we've been looking into that.
I don't want to say there's not, because obviously I'm not like the authority on who's making cheese in the entire U.S. American Cheese Society and the mongering community has been talking a lot about this on social media recently. There's not a lot of cheesemakers of color, of really African-American, indigenous people, Latino people. It's a really a very white world, unfortunately. There's people who are working on that. People are trying to encourage that. We, in a thread today called Mongers for Justice, some Facebook group that just popped up out of all of this, people talked about creating a fund to gift mongers of color a like welcome to the world of cheese gift set that would be for free to help them get a little kickstart in their education. So there's been some very early conversations amongst cheese people. Gordon Edgar, who I mentioned earlier, thumbs up the idea and definitely threw some of his weight around it. Hopefully we can figure something out in these crazy times. There's certainly a bunch of winemakers we just became aware of, and we're going to try to do some tastings and see if there's some winemakers that will fit our bill right now, and some jam makers. The specialty world is so European based that it unfortunately lacks a lot of the diversity that we hope to see in the rest of the world. Great question, though.
So we actually have a couple
Yeah.
threes. So Aaron and Rachel say Everton and the Malbec is a 3 on the scale in their mind.
Woo!
I know you're always excited to hear. And then Sarah says the Harbison
Thank
and the
you.
chocolate is a +3 in her mind as well. So
That's a good move. I like that idea. And we'll talk about part of the reason I think that's a particularly good idea when we get to the chocolate, because that was a smart move. Sorry, I have to try the 3 you guys said. I get that. There's so much meatiness in that cheese and in the wine. It really, like this meat and fruit side. I don't know. There's a really cool flavors in there. That's a good call. I mentioned on the tasting sheet that you guys have that both the rinds of the hard cheeses are edible, and that's not necessarily how we always think of these. And I really wanted to mention that, like, that's your personal preference. And so when you meet a cheese like the soft ones, these rinds are absolutely edible. They're so alive, you know that in some ways, except for the bark, like I mentioned. When you come across like a Gouda or a cheese that's wrapped in wax or plastic, I don't usually tend to eat those. Obviously, or maybe not obviously, they have to use food grade plastics on those, so they won't make you sick, but I don't suggest eating those waxes. But with these natural rinds, that's what these are called. I always suggest that you go slowly towards the rind. You know, you take a piece like this, where the rind's on one side, and I'm going to eat this way towards it. So as I take a bite, I'm getting closer and closer to the rind. I might even eat that last piece right up against the rind. If I don't mind any of those flavors, I can eat the rind and see if I enjoy it. To me, I get a lot of it's more the texture of the rind. I actually don't get any off flavors. They have an incredibly clean cheese for this kind of a style. It's really impressively cared for, but it just fills my mouth with a kind of a sandy texture I don't prefer. Some people really love rinds. I've worked with a lot of cheesemongers who kind of gave me a hard time for not eating as many rinds. And I think the poet's tome is equally delicate enough to eat the rind. So both cheeses that kind of are interesting. Choose your own adventure on those.
Zach, can you give a quick refresher on the scale? There's a couple people asking, what the 3 means again.
Yeah, I'm going to run through them kind of quickly just so. So it's -2 is orange juice, toothpaste. Everything's bad. All is wrong. -1, one thing clashes. I don't enjoy it. Ruins the experience. 0, most of life. I just sit there and eat on the couch. I don't really think about how things interact, or they don't. 0. A +1 is the tomato sauce. Put a little red wine. I cook it down. Tomato sauce is banging. Red wine's totally lost, right? +2, everything mellows out. The wine softens the cheese. The cheese adds interesting notes to the wine. Everybody's happy. And then a +3 is, this perfect moment where everything's aligned and I have created a brand new flavor that is better than either of those things by themselves. From now on, these are how you eat them. Peanut butter and jelly sandwich. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Are we ready to do some chocolate, guys, or do we have some more cheese questions?
No more questions. Amy does have her review.
Please.
Not assertive at first blush. Getting to know you better. There's a surprising ending. Coming back for more afternoon delight.
Oh, the best. What a treat. All right, so we're going to move on to chocolate. We have this really beautiful chocolate today. I think you might have different colors. I don't actually remember what ended up happening. I think we all have Maru chocolates, but I think we have different Marus from all throughout South Asia, South Vietnam. So Maru is this awesome company, as I mentioned, Vietnamese chocolate, and they really focus on each province within this region. The idea being, I mentioned this French word terroir, this idea that you can taste the place. And they want us to look at chocolate like most of us look at wine. What's the difference between the left side of the Mekong Delta and the right side of the Mekong Delta instead of left bank and right bank Bordeaux? And I think chocolate really has this level of character to it. Will is our chocolate expert. He is our chief chocolate officer. He's the only C-suite we have in the company, and he's built this amazing selection of chocolate. We focus on bean to bar chocolate or craft chocolate, and I think we right now have the largest selection in the state of Michigan of chocolate that's made in this kind of way, this level of intention and consciousness, and this celebration of the different areas that the chocolate's grown in. And so right now, I think you can taste chocolate from over 30 different cacao growing regions. Chocolate grows between 20 degrees north and south of the equator, so it's a pretty tight band. I can grow chocolate in Cuba, but I can't do it in southern Florida. And so most of the time, actually back to this conversation about Black Lives Matter, we so often are talking about European cheeses. Will and I always wanted to connect you to everybody in the whole world, and our travels have taken us to beyond just Europe, and all these amazing, passionate producers. Chocolate's way more inclusive. We get so many different cultures that don't get touched by wine and cheese or charcuterie when we include the tropics. And so it's been really fun. I know Will's always had this got to find every culture and every chocolate we can find. And so in the time that we've had the store, I've seen Thai chocolate, never seen that before. We have Indian chocolate before, never had seen that before. And I think Maru is a great example. People don't really think of Vietnam and chocolate, but Vietnam was under French colonialism for a very long time, and the French really loved chocolate. So as soon as they had space in the tropics, they tried growing chocolate successfully. It was left over from colonialism. It was sold to the commodity market without any nod to where it would come from, anybody caring about that. Most of chocolate's history, at least since it's been a bar and enjoyed in the modern era, has been a major commodification of the chocolate bar, right? We eat Hershey bars. Some of us might feel fancy and get a Swiss chocolate or a German or a Belgian chocolate. None of these talk about where the cocoa is grown. Most chocolate comes from West Africa, where there's slave-like conditions, child labor issues. And so we at Mongers, we source direct trade chocolate, or from producers who source direct, or people who use fair trade, people who use a variety of different sourcing methods, but they're doing it consciously, right? They're not just buying chocolate from who knows, it's just chocolate. They're buying chocolate from this farm or that farm. It's very similar when you're looking at a wine bottle, where all of a sudden you can find a state-grown chocolate. So Pump Street comes to mind right off the top of my head, where you have chocolate that's like this specific estate or this specific estate. Maru's a really cool example of this idea, because so often in chocolate, the people growing it never actually try chocolate bars, right? It's a major disconnect. I grow it in West Africa. You don't have a lot of kids in West Africa eating a Hershey Kiss. And so people grow these chocolate bars, or these, they don't grow chocolate bars, much to our chagrin. Willy Wonka wasn't exactly how it looks, but they grow cacao pods. There's a lot of work that goes into making it into a chocolate bar. Will can tell you in a lot more detail than I ever could. But they grow these cacao beans, they send them over after they're dried, fermented, maybe roasted, but they don't get chocolate bars. One of the cooler companies in the game, Oskinosi, one of the first things Sean started doing was bringing the chocolate bar of the last batch to his partner meetings when he went to go negotiate the next harvest's price. And so Sean sat there with these farmers and ate a chocolate bar for the first time in some of these adult farmers' lives. They got to chase their finished work, talk about changes they can make, try the next harvest, and keep having this feedback loop that I talked about we get to enjoy in our cheese life much more fluidly. And so you start having this with chocolate and farmers. For Maru, they're at that country of origin, so they have a really fluid conversation. And once more, the owners have tried to include the culture building that kind of comes with growing chocolate. So before the French, they just grew the chocolate, brought it to France. Who cares if the Vietnamese even care about chocolate? The Vietnamese culture is not super chocolate centric, but Maru's gone through and actually opened up, I believe at this point, 2 cafes. Will can correct me if I'm wrong, within Vietnam. So there's actually a place that Vietnamese can go get a drinking chocolate, some truffles, all these different things to enjoy the chocolate from their land. They also only source the cane sugar and any ingredients that go into the chocolates from Vietnam itself. So they make a really great coffee chocolate where the coffee and the chocolate are sourced from the same area. They now have a kumquat one where it's the same story, and a coconut milk one that is coconut milk from Vietnam because they couldn't find powdered milk in Vietnam and they didn't want to start sourcing from elsewhere. So Maru's been one of our favorite kind of chocolate partners since we started. We've always enjoyed selling their chocolate. They also have a little bit of a Michigan story. Vince, who's one of the two partners, grew up in Ann Arbor, U of M, Pioneer High School, and only then found his way out to Vietnam. So yeah, what do we think about the chocolate? And with the harbison, it's going to go great. Whoever made that decision earlier, you know what's up. You know, the Vietnamese chocolate tends to have like a real earthy, cinnamony kind of flavor back note. And I think with the woodsiness of that cheese, but plus you have all that creaminess of the harbison to kind of give it this blank palette of flavor, I think that's a really cool cheese and chocolate pairing. Well done.
We got a couple questions about the wine. So, number one, why does chocolate seem to be better with most reds than whites? And then also, why do
Hmm.
reds and goats kind of fight in terms of flavor profile?
Yeah, all those are great questions, and they all have to do about interplay of like acid and other flavors. So, um, white chocolate, or I'm sorry, white wine and chocolate. It's this idea that you have chocolate's incredibly packed, full of all sorts of stimulant and things. It's a lot of flavor, right? It's not a mild compound, and white wine has all this acid, and so I think that it's too much. It overwhelms the palate. There's not a really any any opportunity for something to kind of fold into itself, if that makes any sense. It does in my head, at least, I swear. When you get to red wine, you're going from these like really high acid flavors, you're softening it. Sometimes there's still just as much acid, but with the tannin structure, your mouth isn't focused on that in the same way. And you all of a sudden are introduced, we talked about the flavor wheel. If the white wine is all this like peach and stone fruit flavors and melon flavors, and the red wine is all these darker flavors, chocolate's very much on this spectrum, right? You taste very little chocolate that reminds you of honeysuckle and herbaceousness. And so I think that you need something in the same world to ever find something to like hook and work together. We find that chocolate and wine are way harder than most people want them to be to pair together. We definitely have some that we enjoy. This Melbeck is something I would go to because of those dark fruit flavors. But in full honesty, I like a port because I think that the dryness of red wine clashes with the sugar and the chocolate. And so it's this like delicate balance of the big players that kind of mess with your palate, which is sugar, acid, tannins. Those are the things that are really going to kind of hit your mouth in a certain way. And if it hits it a different way, it's going to take it off. So, the goat, I really think goat is once again high acid compared to cow's milk. I actually think it's the capreol acids, like or capreol proteins. It's the goatiness that I think doesn't work with red wine. I think the tannins and goatiness just kind of get funky. And that's why I think when you taste a bottle conditioned red wine, a red wine that's really softened over years, all of a sudden it can play well with the goat. But otherwise, similar to the animal, goats are a little bit rambunctious. They like to kind of mix it up a little bit too much for the red wine. So that's how I see it.
Perfect. We had a couple questions about the store situation. I know there's nothing official out, but
Yeah,
yes, if there's retail appointments available, any updates
yeah.
on Ferndale, and Will answered in the things, but you can also
Yeah, no, I'd still like to say it. We're really, we're excited. We're also incredibly, I guess, trepidatious because we're opening up two stores at once. And again, it's just going to be a lot. We ask for everybody's patience, but we're excited that Monday on the 8th, we're going to try to open up Detroit. There'll only be 4 people allowed in the store. And unlike me right now, only masks are allowed. So all of our staff will be in masks, and we'll ask anybody who's in the store to continue to wear masks. We'll have hand sanitizer available, and we'll be trying to practice social distancing, but we'll still be inviting people to come into the store and peruse. And we just ask that we all do our best and be patient in this moment as we figure it out. And then Ferndale's going to be opening up on Saturday the 13th. So they're going to give us Friday off to really get everything settled. And then they're going to open up for their very first weekend. And that's going to be limited hours. So Detroit's 12 to 6, Ferndale's 11 to 4. And same idea, they're going to have a limited amount of people. It's going to be based on a calculation similar to shopping malls, which is like 10 per stall. I think we're going to do like a 50% of that at Rust Belt and do something like 5 per stall. And we're going to have people in and, do our best as we kind of activate a new space. For us in Ferndale, we're actually moving from, if anybody had been to our original Rust Belt Ferndale location, it was kind of set up almost like a New York newsstand, almost like a kiosk. It felt like you couldn't go into it. But we're going to have a larger space that you can walk in and kind of peruse. So we're really excited to see how Rust Belt 2.0 looks. So those are exciting things. We're not going to turn on grilled cheeses yet in Midtown. We're going to give that a little more time, a week or two, see how in-store life feels again. And then grilled cheeses might go available for curbside. We might put out the patio tables. We don't know, but for now, we don't want people inside eating. And we'll probably cut down on sampling and stuff like that. Well, of course, if someone's really torn on something, we're going to invite you to try it, but we're not going to have samples out. We're going to be much more conscious of those kind of things. What other questions do we have, guys?
Yeah, a couple other questions. Ann wants to know if we'll still be doing virtual events for a while, and I figure if people keep showing up, we'll be doing them.
Yeah, Benji said it best. If you guys still want them, we're going to do them. We're going to also keep doing curbside and things like that. Shipping available in all 48 states. The other 2 are hard to get to right now for us. We're working on that. So curbside, but we're going to add in-store. So nothing we're doing right now is going to change. We're just adding back what we used to do in some ways.
Marielle wants to know, do you do in-home tastings once quarantine is officially over? And I know we used to, so.
We used to, and I got a request today. So you're the second one of the day who asked for us to do an in-store. So far the private tastings we've been doing have been over Zoom, but I think that, as long as people are willing to do them maybe outside at first or do some kind of efforts towards social distancing, I think I'll be totally comfortable doing it. Mostly I want to make sure you guys are comfortable. And we, want to make sure our staff are comfortable. So once we're in your home, it kind of changes the equations. Yeah. What other questions, friends?
Marielle wants to make sure we do a cheese and wine 2.0. And then, if
yes.
Will wants to know, would you pop out of a cheesecake for enough money?
Ooh, I think Will knows this. Yes, I would. For enough money, I will probably do a lot of things. We can create some kind of auction website where we make some fun tiers and see maybe for charity. I don't know. I might be setting myself up for so much stupid things right now. I should stop talking. Benji, what else?
That was so far the last question. So I think
that's the last question. Awesome. I'm caught up
at the end. What's your favorite beer from John?
Ooh, what's my favorite beer? I'm a big fan of this idea that it's all time and a place. The right beer for the right moment. I've been really enjoying darker IPAs and stuff like that. Matthew, I haven't tried it yet, but Matthew just brought in a black IPA from North Pier that I'm very excited to try. I've enjoyed these like hop ciders we keep getting lately. So Ping Pong and Topspin and the dry hopped Arlo. I find that as it gets hotter, I want like more refreshing things. I really want low ABV. I've been drinking a lot of wine, so a lot of Gruner and all these summer wines. It was crazy when I opened this Melbeck. It's 14.5% alcohol, and it's so different than everything else I've been drinking that I smelled it and I was like, whoa, it felt like it blew my hair back in a way that a wine probably never would have normally. So yeah, that's what I've been drinking. Not a lot of beer. We have some Urban Rest beer coming up. I'm really excited to get, but I keep not taking it because we need it for a tasting. It's a hard reality.
That's it on your questions. I don't know if there's anything.
That's it on my questions, guys. You guys have answered your own questions. We have some like professional tasters in this group. It's been fun to watch your tasting notes and whatnot. I guess I just want to talk about some of the things we have coming up. And then I'll start talking about how much we're so thankful for all of you. But on the horizon, we're going to have a Hooks cheese tasting coming up, I believe, next week. I've kind of lost sense of time at this point with many tastings a week. But Hooks is coming up. We're going to be tasting the 20-year cheddar. Only for the second time in their history are they releasing a 20-year cheddar. I think the idea of a cheese being made in the year 2000 and sitting there this whole time through all this history is fascinating, and I'm so excited to taste it, this little time capsule back to the year 2000 that we get. And we're going to be tasting that along with 4 different years of their cheddar and then one of their blue cheeses. And Tony Hook from Hook's Cheese is going to join me. So it won't just be my voice. It's going to be really exciting. I'm excited to talk about that one. We have a charcuterie tasting coming up for Father's Day on the 19th, where we're actually going to taste meat for the first time at one of these, and a couple cheeses, just because, I can't not taste cheese. And then Essex cheese hasn't been announced, hasn't gone public yet, but Essex cheese is one of our favorite importers. And towards the end of the month, we're going to be doing a tasting with Rachel Jewell, one of the Essex sisters, who is the two women who kind of run Essex on the day-to-day. And Essex accounts for a lot of our top 10 cheeses. So I'm pretty sure almost everybody who's been to the store knows our Comté, knows our Parmesan, knows our Lemieux Gouda, our Broadbender Gouda. Those are all all Essex cheeses. So Rachel's going to talk about the amazing sourcing they do, and that's really exciting coming up. We also are working on some fun things that are, not exactly live tastings, but some boxes you could take home and enjoy. So there'll be a Detroit pizza box and some, grillable boxes and things like that as the summer kind of continues. And we go from sitting around tables and eating large cheese meals to kind of standing outside with our friends. A place the cheese tray doesn't survive very well. Hot picnics is not a good place for a big, beautiful cheese display. You might have noticed. So we'll switch to halloumi and mozzarella and feta and all those summer cheeses very soon. And we also have some summer wines that I keep alluding to that we'll kind of make a big vlog about and celebrate coming up. So we have a lot going on. We've been so thankful to all of you who've allowed us to have a lot going on. Please keep calling us for those private tastings, those fun birthday experiences. If you are doing one of these experiences and it's a special occasion, let us know. We'd love to shout out your special occasion. We take it very seriously that you choose to celebrate with us and allow us to be part of your gifting and allow us to be part of your celebrations. Will and I started this company, like I keep saying, to connect people and to share with people. And it's been just so beautiful that it's gone so beyond food, and that we get to share your celebration in your lives and such. And so we're so thankful. We're so overwhelmed by the outcry of the community in these times. And we promise we're going to keep doing what we do if you keep asking for it. And so let us know what you're looking to taste. Let us know what you're looking to try. We're always going to be here for you to do it. So thank you guys so, so much. We'll stay on for a couple minutes for questions. We'll unmute you if you want to say hi to your friends, but I don't have anything unless you have any more questions. So
couple last minute ones. A
ooh,
couple
good. I wasn't ready to say goodbye.
You're fine. A couple of event suggestion types, like a mozzarella and a fruit tasting. Someone asked about the family cheese tasting. I know we've been talking about ideas around that.
Yeah, please. We're definitely talking about, I want to have something by July, I'm hoping, where that's designed from, I'm thinking ages 7 to 12 or 5 to 12, and definitely designed around the whole family coming together and eating. So if you guys have suggestions right now, I'm kind of fixated on the sensory experience, the sensory box, talking about the different textures and smells of the cheese. So I'd love to hear your ideas, but family box will be coming soon. What other ideas do you guys have?
Question that we've gotten actually quite a bit. How about linking with some of the local breweries like Supernatural in Livonia? They have some awesome beer and also do gluten removal. So I know we've talked about even Brew Detroit and some of the local Detroit ones.
Yeah, when we did our beer cheese tasting, we didn't loop them in directly, but we focused. I think 3 of our beers were Michigan beers out of 4, something like that. We have our Hooks tasting coming up, and those are some. There's not Michigan well, there's one Michigan product in that, but one for the Father's Day tasting. We're going to feature a couple more Michigan products. I think in the future, as we kind of keep going through all these ideas, we're going to need to keep bringing in other people and other ideas. So Michigan beer will be coming soon. And yeah, that's a good idea. I know I'm tired of hearing my own voice, so I don't know about you guys.
Besides that, someone asked about the 20-year. What if it's a stinky cheese?
No, it's actually quite interesting. I haven't actually tasted it. I'm kind of almost waiting for the night of so you guys can see the genuine reaction. I think it'll be more fun. The 20-year cheddar, for when I hear, softens at a certain point. So it doesn't totally go funky or fall apart. It doesn't get stinky, but it doesn't actually get as sharp as from what I hear the 12 or the 15 would be, that it has a falling action, a milding out. So I'll be really excited to try it. How cheese ages is a fascinating concept. We'll talk a lot about that. It'll be very interesting to have someone who kind of gets to watch them age in a different hands-on way with Tony being on the call. I met him Tuesday. We did a little pre-run on Zoom because Tony's a man who has not done a lot of Zooms. He's been busy making cheese this whole time. And so it was really fun to kind of chat with him. And he's been running that place since the late 70s. And it's just crazy to think about how much time he's been making cheese and how much he has to tell us. So we'll be really excited to listen to his stories.
All right, well, I think that's a wrap. People are.
That's a wrap. Well, guys, thank you so much. We love you. Thank you. We'll see you all soon at the next tasting, and peace out.
Thank you. Everyone is.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you,
Thank
Zach.
you.
Thank you. Awesome.
Bye.